Welcome to Live.Laugh.Launch, the go-to-market podcast for everyone who brings products to life. I'm Katie Moss, and whether you're leading strategy, building campaigns, designing experiences, or figuring out how all the pieces fit together, this show is for you. We explore every angle of go-to-market success, from the big picture thinking to the nitty-gritty execution. Each episode dives into what really works, what doesn't, and how cross-functional teams collaborate to turn ideas into market wins. If you're in marketing, building a startup, or just fascinated by how great products find their audience, you're in the right place. Let's launch into it. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Live.Laugh.Launch. Today, I have with me Sophie Pagalday. She is a marketing leader with 15 years of experience driving industry and product-led growth for enterprise B2B SaaS, cloud, AI, and robotics companies. She translates complex products into market narratives that come to life in every customer interaction. She believes the voice of the customer is the most powerful growth signal, that leadership doesn't require authority, just trust and clarity, and that cross-functional alignment eats strategy for lunch. For the past 4 years, Sophie has led product marketing at Amazon, and now she's on to her next exciting chapter. So welcome, Sophie.
Yes, thank you, Katie, for having me.
Awesome. I think it's good to mention that you were actually my first product marketing mentor. So it's certainly a pleasure having you here.
It's been so fun to see your growth and how you've evolved, what you've done over the years. And I do remember having those very first conversations with you about what product marketing was and how you approach things.
Awesome. And I've been following what you've been doing as well, which has been very exciting. So let's talk a little bit about it. So in your recent role at Amazon, you were operating PMM at a huge scale across global teams, industries, and hundreds of products. How does product marketing fundamentally change when you're no longer launching products, but orchestrating this huge ecosystem?
Yeah, what's interesting is that it doesn't really change much. I have been at startups. I've been at a hyperscaler, mid-sized companies. And I think the role of PMM is ultimately really about simplifying. So whether you have 2 products or 300, at the end of the day, what you're really doing is kind of diving into the chaos, understanding, what the customers really need to hear from you, what they're struggling with, and then translating that in a simple way. It does take a lot of complexity to simplify, but it also, I think that mindset makes you very intentional about how you take even new product launches, because at Amazon, we're constantly launching new features and products still, even though we have 300 products in the portfolio. But it really makes you very intentional about how you approach every single launch, and how you make sure that your narrative stays consistent, unless it actually has to shift, so that customers can really navigate all of the complexity. And I think really that's what makes product marketing. I think if you're getting yourself in a situation where it feels really complex, and when and how you're really thinking about the product, the portfolio, how you communicate it, too many layers of messaging, you probably need to rethink how you're going about it.
Yeah, and that can even happen at, smaller organizations where things get a little bit murky with multiple brands and things like that.
Absolutely.
And I think, making something simple is not as easy as it sounds, right? It's probably the biggest skill for product marketing, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing. And I think it really takes a lot of internalizing what's really happening for the customer in terms of internalizing the product. There's kind of the putting it in the PMM blender, what a unique perspective that then you can bring back to the customer in a simple way that really resonates for them, that feels like it unlocks something for them that they haven't been able to unlock before in a unique way. That's where your differentiation comes in. But that can happen at really any scale. That's really what good product marketing looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of PMMs, they still tie their value to, launches and deliverables, but that's not really what makes the value of a PMM at the end of the day. So what does that value really look like, or what should it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I agree with you. There's, if you just chase the outputs and just want more enablement tools, you're not really solving problems. So I think there's kind of 3 areas that I would focus on. One is kind of how you're making your decisions about the simplification that needs to happen, and where you have that power to unlock results for customers and for even your stakeholders that they're trying to all, either create a product or try to sell the product or market the product. I think the second piece is really around how are you taking in the signals like from customers and you're, again, internalizing those. And then the third piece is about how that then translates into a coherent narrative that continues to grow in that simple but crisp way for customers. There was an example at Amazon where we really want to be focused on use cases because we have 300 products and it's really hard to then simplify that for the customer and understand what the value really is. And I led an entire exercise around how we really thought about these use cases and what were those key problems that customers were trying to solve. And again, like bringing in those signals, but then making a lot of decisions about how we invented and simplified the way that we approached those use cases and communicated how this big portfolio could then deliver value to the customer. So I think at any scale, again, you're still looking for not creating more use cases or more enablement assets for every use case, but more about simplifying, really prioritizing, and then being able to drive that coherent narrative that shows up through the customer journey, through different ways that you engage the customer that feels coherent and that feels like it gets the customer from where they are today, which is probably confused, trying to solve a problem, not knowing where to go, to then sales being able to show them, the light, but then also knowing that you can deliver that from a product perspective in a meaningful way for the customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of that, PMM can't just work in their own bubble. They've got to work cross-functionally as well. So I know that in the past, you've described product marketing folks as a connective tissue. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I take the role of product marketing as the voice of the customer very seriously. I think someone needs to occupy that chair in the room. And a lot of times, like, product marketing has sort of the benefit and the privilege to actually be separate from the demand campaign and separate from creating the product and separate from actually having to make the sale. So you can really kind of stand in this more like almost like advocate for the customer role, and then also in a more objective place where you can really start thinking about in terms of the full customer journey and how are we being consistent throughout, and are we marketing things that in a way that really reflects what we can deliver so the customer is not getting disappointed? Are we selling in a way that really matches how customers want to buy? Are we then delivering the product and kind of creating that transition from sales to implementation in a way that feels natural for the customer, and we kind of dive into their world and really implement something that will deliver value quickly? And I think just being in those meetings and those conversations with all of these different stakeholders that are really just focused on these outcomes, it can really start showing you where the gaps are, and you can start seeing some of the disconnects. And I think the great thing about product marketing is it can kind of stand in the middle and then really help drive that consistency with alignment and show different stakeholders where we may be breaking some of that consistency and what it could mean for the customer.
Yeah. How do you get those teams or those individuals on board? Like, how do you get them to trust you and take you seriously?
Yeah, absolutely. So, being the voice of the customer is a huge responsibility. You have to know the customer. You can't do that from behind your screen. You have to be in front of the customer as often as you can, and really have tons of empathy for the customer as well. Making sure that you're understanding where they're really coming from, and then synthesizing those, those challenges, those needs, those like sometimes even personal motivations to do certain things when you look at even at the persona level, and then being able to translate those into frameworks that every function in the organization can absorb and translate into something meaningful in the work that they're doing. I think from demand gen perspective, just like knowing how to engage customers in a really meaningful way where they're actually living and breathing and like evaluating solutions, and in a way that in a language that speaks to them is important. When you look at sales, again, how do we align to the buyer journey? Do we have the right people in the room? Do we even have the right tools as we actually follow the customer buying journey to help the customer unlock the next step in their evaluation? From a product perspective, are we building the right things and are we delivering value? And I think all of that comes from, again, like having a lot of empathy, spending a lot of time with the customer, but then creating frameworks of how you deliver the insights in a way that's meaningful to each one of those stakeholders in a way that you can influence. At the end of the day, they have to make the decision. They have to own the outcome of that area. But I've seen a lot of trust earned when you can really distill the information that you have in a way that's meaningful, and then that drives results. When you see a salesperson that finally they're like, oh, if I bring this person into the conversation earlier on, my sales going to go smoother, then they'll try to do it every time. You earn that trust already. But it's not just about throwing information over the fence. It really is about how you distill it down in a way that's meaningful for each one of those functions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found that, unless someone's just a really bad employee, most people care about the customer and they want to know more about the customer. And so this information is usually very, very valuable for them. Especially for the groups you mentioned, product sales, customer facing teams. Awesome. So in being that voice of the customer, that can be very different across different industries, different locations, et cetera. How do you balance like global consistency with local relevance in your market narratives, especially for these huge kind of global companies?
Yeah, I think there's some things that need to remain at the core true, right? Because otherwise you lose your identity. You don't know who you're targeting or what challenges you're actually tackling or what you're selling if those things aren't true like across the board, right? And then I think there's some things that you can customize to make sure that you're really resonating at the local level. So when I think about this, I think about it kind of like in the messaging hierarchy, if you will. So I think, again, like challenges are core and are likely the same. You're probably building this product for some common challenges that are like true globally. I think your value proposition is likely the same for the most part, because again, the core of how you deliver that in a unique way doesn't change by region. I think when you think about the customer promises and what you can deliver as well, those use cases and how you deliver on those use cases and the value that you can deliver for the customer usually stays the same. I think when you kind of dive deeper into what are your proof points and what are the reasons to believe, I think that's where you could get a little bit more nuanced, because there may be some core proof points, of course, at the kind of global level, but there may be things that are unique to the region that you really need to make sure that you're driving. And I think this comes through a lot in kind of how we deliver for the customers, like, for example, customer stories. Like at the local level, customers want to see that we are delivering a product that really drives the value for like the needs of that region, and then that we have delivered it for someone in that region effectively to prove that that we're able to do it with even like their unique requirements or regulations or whatever they may be dealing with. I think the other thing that can be more nuanced too is I think personas at the core can be the same, but there are sometimes cultural differences and nuances that you have to keep in mind in terms of how people do business, how the buying cycle may be different. Sometimes, the personas may have obviously different personalities, even though like maybe their core function within the buying cycle and the customer company may be the same. So you have to account for those. But I think maintaining that core of who you are, why you're here, and what you're delivering in a unique way has to remain consistent for you to even continue to build a global business as well.
Yeah. And the way that you kind of execute, demand generation campaigns, I know that can also change by region. And in your most recent role, you worked a lot with demand generation and product marketing. So that's very interesting to me. How do you find that customer insights best flow into that campaign planning at scale?
Yeah, I think where they really come in and can help is build at least a high level customer journey that works. So the way that we do integrated marketing at AWS, really we look at kind of like the entire customer journey and how we engage customers in a meaningful way throughout. And we have a very clear goal that we're trying to achieve with the customer in terms of what is that kind of that first step that they're going to take with us. I think insights can come in from the perspective of, do we need different messages for different personas at the different stages? In some cases, maybe, we find that in the awareness stage, maybe we can go really broad, but as we go deeper into the customer journey, we need to be more personalized. So we do drive insights in terms of personas, for example, messaging, those customer challenges and how they're looking to solve them, how they buy, so that we can really drive that customer journey at the highest level. And then we do customize for the regions as well. But it's more, again, around like culturally, are these topics that we're talking about, for example, in Neymar, going to resonate in EMEA? Is there some regulation, for example, in EMEA that's coming up that is very nuanced? And the messaging may still land, and we still may be targeting the same personas, and the customer journey potentially works, but we may want some customization of the content to be able to land those things the right way. I think, it's good to plan at kind of that global level because you can keep that core consistent. and we can bring those insights on who the customer is, etc. But then you need to have those like local insights as well from the field on how customers actually buy, and then also how messages land as well.
Yeah. Going back to, working so closely with demand gen, how has that been different at Amazon? Did it give you any clarity about how you've worked with demand gen before? I know it's been a very different product marketing experience for me when I've been very close and then not so close from demand gen.
Yes, I think we kind of invented it together, right? I mean, a lot of the process was very like diving deep together, and it really started from understanding the market. So that's where one can really lean in a lot. It's kind of starting from what does the market look like today? What are some of those challenges? Where can we fit in? From where is again our differentiation, and then also driving. From a PMM perspective, how should we think about, go to market, and where does demand gen fit in this go to market engine as well? And depending on how we go to market for different categories, for example, what does that mean in terms of the steps we want customers to take throughout as well? And that's where really PMM kind of leaned in. It was a lot in the beginning, providing all of those insights to demand gen, but to then again map out that customer journey. But even I think as we mapped out the customer journey, we found that we need to work very closely together on content as well, because we can't just throw messaging over the fence and then hope for the best. Those needs to translate into meaningful engagements for the customer, and PMMs can really help shape what that meaningful engagement could look like from a channel perspective, from a perspective of how you present the information, what kind of insights do the customer needs to have in that moment, what are the questions and anxieties and objections that customers are grappling with at that moment. So I think PMMs can really help shape up content strategy as well. And then of course inform the content from an SME perspective as well. So we've really learned that we really need to work together throughout the entire cycle. And, we're really working on kind of operationalizing this and making it a little bit more agile, because with AI, you have to constantly bring in insights and be willing to then make changes to make sure that we are keeping up with the customer, because their business are changing all around them. Our technology is changing all around them. So I think super tight integration is becoming more important than ever.
Yeah, for sure. And glad you mentioned AI. We are now to the segment of the show where we talk about AI, which always happens, as you can imagine. Obviously, AI has changed how PMM teams are working. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you have been using AI in your role and across teams.
Yes. I mean, I use AI every moment of every day. I now don't even know what the previous life without AI looked like. But I think, so AI is very good at synthesizing information and giving you key insights very quickly across a lot of data, which is great. I think from a market research perspective, it's simplified to all of these different, analyst reports and websites, and be able to bring back some key insights or even just a competitive analysis, even if you then obviously go validate things and you bring in your own insights from a trade show where you talk to them about, or you saw a demo. There's also the insight that you have, but you can merge it with this very fast way of really consolidating a lot of data into meaningful insights as well. So research is one huge area. I think the other area where I'm seeing a shift for PMMs is that we're not doing as much content writing anymore. Now, I'm not a fan of AI slop. I think that we need to massage the content and make sure it gets to a place. Usually the first draft is not good if you're posting that. You should not be doing that. But I think it does help us not have to write everything from scratch. But what becomes really important is that the PMM really needs to be an SME and needs to be able kind of generate the data that then AI needs to be able to create content that's meaningful. You need to have the persona profile so that AI is knows who you're writing this content for. And you need to have those differentiated messaging that you want to land at the end of that content. And you need to have a unique point of view that you want to communicate with that content. So again, there's still a lot of kind of diving into the chaos and still kind of creating your own point of view and having judgment about how you want to guide the AI agent to deliver good results. But I do use it for a lot of content. We're now changing the way that we are doing messaging so that it's not just readable for humans, but also so that the agent can reason on top of it. and then be able to create better content that is closer to the finish line, in the sense that if there's something that, like, some words that don't land with your customer, even though they feel like synonyms, or if there's a way that you don't want to really communicate something because it just doesn't align with your brand, then you're able to kind of like give it more of those nuances so it knows how to create that content. So I think those are some of the key areas that I'm seeing. And of course, we're evolving, for example, with launches, being able to bring in kind of like your launch messaging and then have it kind of like draft all of the assets that you need for launches and the key message that you need for the launch. I think in terms of enablement, just being able to, again, take the messaging framework and very quickly draft a first call deck. So it accelerates a lot of the process for now. And again, like, just helps you bring in data quicker. I think what's important, though, is that we don't lose our decision making, that we don't lose our point of view on things. AI can reason on existing data, but humans have imagination that goes beyond what AI can really take from data. And I think that's where the true insights happen. Like, I think the best PMMs are the ones that just have those light bulb moments where they connect the dots on something and they have an idea that is like outside of what anyone has done before. There's no data on it, but you realize you can unlock something for the customer. And I think that's where we can continue to deliver value.
Yeah. Are there other specific places where you think things have become more human and strategic than they were before AI entered the scene?
Yes. I don't know if this is a controversial perspective, but I do think that sales is important in like a human way now. I still have a hard time believing that people will buy things without knowing there's a human that cares on the other side. I think if you just think you're buying an agent from an agent who at the end of the day is going to be like, oops, didn't work, I'm not sure that you can pull your full trust into that as a human. And so I think having that human connection with sales is important, especially when you're making a very large decision that can really impact your company at a massive scale. You want to know you have someone you can call, right? When all things fail and the agent on the call can't help you, like, you need to have that person that you can call. So I think there still needs to be humans behind that, and that matters a lot. I've been reading a lot lately about this idea that everyone wants to use AI to create content and no one wants to read the content that AI creates, because a lot of it loses soul, it loses the meaning, right? It loses the inspiration and those nuggets that only humans can come up with. And so I think we have to be careful again as we walk this path that we don't lose the human aspect. And I think also, in terms of customers feeling supported, it's not just about sales. I think it's like once you go into implementation, sometimes it just feels good as a human to have someone you can connect with on the other side that can walk you through something, that can assure you that, this is going to work for your business, and maybe like even brainstorm with you about how you may want to, go about change management. So I think there's still a lot of areas where we still want that human connection.
Yeah, totally agree. Let's talk about frameworks and documents. I know frameworks have their place, but when you and I talked a few weeks ago, I know we were also saying they have their challenges. So I think it's very important, product marketers don't hide behind documents. What does PMM leadership look like when information is properly, distributed, dynamic, maybe even AI assisted, but it goes across as cross-functional teams and people use that information, it's not stuck in those documents.
Yeah, I always say that, it's so important that your work like comes to life in every day. If that's not happening, again, you need to revisit how you're doing things. I've seen a lot of posts lately on LinkedIn where people say, oh, how do I get more visibility of my work so people know what I'm working on? And PMM's creating newsletters to like be able to talk about the work that they've done. And look, I think you should be an advocate for yourself. I think you should be given visibility to the work that you do. But the reality is that if your messaging is not alive on the website, if your decks are not being used because the salesperson feels like you have that one slide that they just cannot miss, and it's a huge light bulb over the customer that just kind of like unlocks the sale and they finally understand the value and they want to go sign on the dotted line. If you don't have those moments where the customer is truly firsthand engaging with what you're producing, then again, I think you may need to think about whether you are focused on the right things. It's easy to get lost in a lot of persona documents and all these things, but I think you need to think about it in terms of how is this information going to be used, and really not create all these vanity projects just because they're fun and we like diving deep and creating all these like crazy frameworks that feel so good, but more think about, if I give this to sales, what can they do tomorrow with it? And what is it really going to unlock for them? And how am I going to position that to them the right way? Because if you have the right enablement asset and you have the right enablement session in place, that salesperson will walk away excited to try this. I had a situation years ago at a company I was working for where I was like listening to a lot of demos, and there were a lot of deals that were going sideways and we weren't really sure why. And as I started following the full journey, we were realizing that there was a persona that always came at the end that was literally killing every single one of our deals. They did not like our pitch for how it helped them or how it replaced certain things that they were doing. And that was a huge
success. IT, procurement?
It was an accountant.
Accountant. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Because they couldn't see what their life looked like after they implemented the product, and they were very scared about how their day-to-day was going to change. And we were missing that every single time, and we did not have good messaging for them. And once we came up with the right messaging, we started bringing them early on. We started showing them how the product could really empower them and unlock a lot of the things that they were kind of wasting hours and hours doing that wasn't adding value. Then they started really getting on board with buying the product. But I think those are the things that you need to bring to the team. They need to be practical. They need to, again, be things that, you can all agree, let's go test this, because obviously we have an issue here that we've identified. We all align that that's the problem. And we have these, potential solutions, this asset, this way that we're going to change the sales cycle, et cetera, to be able to unlock those things. And I think that's where then your ideas, your insights, your frameworks really start living in the real world and have an impact on customers.
Yeah, agree with all that. I think also it's been really helpful for me to get people on board from the beginning to feel like we are, tackling this thing together. Even if I am creating a framework or messaging or something, it's helpful to come at it as a team. And they often have really great insights, like you said, with the end of the sales process, the accountants coming in. If you are working in, a little silo or a little vacuum as a PMM, you would never know that. And whereas if you, talk to sales at the very beginning, you would get that from the beginning. So you don't have to redo the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what you said is very important. Like, it's almost like the framework is also a product in a way, right? You have to create it in a way that meets the customer needs, and your customers are all of your stakeholders. So if you don't work backwards, what they are trying to unlock and where they're getting caught up and where their challenges are and what their goals are, then it's never going to work. It's not going to get implemented. And the other thing is keep it simple. Again, going back to the beginning, I think the more complex, the harder it is to remember all these different things. And it needs to be memorable. And I need to be able to not have, the framework in front of me when I'm on a sales call and still be able to land whatever that framework is providing for me so that I can move the customer along.
Yeah, absolutely. So PMM has been changing over the years, obviously, especially with AI coming in. The work that we're doing is changing. Looking ahead over the next 2 to 3 years, what mindset shift do you think PMMs need to have to stay relevant?
That's a good question. I think there's just so many aspects of PMM, and I do think there is going to be some consolidation. There's frameworks for inbound and outbound PMM, and how do you kind of amplify out into the world versus what you bring into your business to make decisions. There's all these different frameworks and all of these different stages throughout the customer journey you could focus on and dive deep into and all these things. I think a lot of this is going to get consolidated. You're not going to have as big teams. So there's going to have to be, a PMM that's probably orchestrating a bunch of agents that are very specialized in these different things. An agent that can do the competitive analysis, an agent that can constantly bring you insights from the outside. I think there's create enablement, et cetera. We're not experts at everything. No PMM is good at all of the things. But I think we're going to have to more and more lean into how we improve our judgment of, in the end, what we decide to move forward with. I think that's the key thing that humans will still have control over for a very long time is what do you decide not to chase and what do you decide to move forward with. And that can't just be informed by agents looking for information on the web. or even documents, it needs to be also informed by your real life experience out in the world. One thing that I am excited about is I think the more we're having to like write these documents and be in front of the computer, or the less that we have to do that manually, the more time we have to go out into the world and meet with customers. And so I think just like shifting towards, those true human connections and building that empathy and really understanding the business and the customer day to day, like use the time that you're saving on some of this manual work to then shift towards being present with your customers, being out in the real world. That is the thing that AI cannot replace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you have built a lot of PMM teams. You just mentioned agents. As you, move forward and you start to build new teams in your new role, do you foresee hiring more generalized PMMs versus like people who are specific experts in one area, like competitive analysis or pricing or something else? Like, is it more important to be a generalist now than it used to be?
I think what's really important with PMMs in the end is, do you have the right instincts? Are you able to make those high judgment decisions the right way? At Amazon, we call it be right a lot. And be right a lot doesn't mean that you're right every single time, but it does mean that you do have the right instinct. And even when you don't, you still know how to use data to correct yourself, right? And to learn and to evolve. So I think for me, like the future of hiring PMMs is going to be more about how you think, and it's going to be more about how you make decisions, and it's going to be more about how you question data. It's going to be more about how you absorb the real world and then combine it with the data to make decisions. So I think it's going to be more, almost like a general manager type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Of you know a lot of things in a way. You don't need to know potentially the specifics of how to do every one thing. There may be, formulas for agents that already have an algorithm built in that does it really well in terms of giving you that information or taking that action. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to the judgment and the decision making.
Interesting. Love that. Awesome. Well, it has been so great to have you on, Sophie.
Thank you.
Where can people find you? LinkedIn or website or anything else?
Yeah, easiest is on LinkedIn. I'm always there. I'll be updating my new chapter on there as well if you want to follow. But I'm so happy to connect with anyone who has questions or wants to share ideas. I'm always up for a good conversation about PMM. So thank you for having me, Katie. It's been great talking to you and catching up. Yeah, very excited.
Same to you. All right. Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.